Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. And I want to talk briefly about something called the Ghomeshi effect. Now, before you jump to the conclusion that I'm talking about the phenomenon as it is described by feminist slanderers, liars, and criminals, I mean the Ghomeshi effect, the theater dance production, not the so-called social phenomenon. Now, as you are probably aware from watching this channel in the past, a group of feminists in Eastern Canada, notably Toronto and Ottawa, have created a theater dance production which they have branded with the name of a man we now know to have been innocent of the charges of sexual assault that were laid against him, and which we also know whose accusers were not just misled or wrong or over-enthusiastic in their accusations towards him. They were fraudsters. They were caught repeatedly lying and colluding and misleading the police and lying to the Crown. They were liars. They were criminals. They were, let's be real, sexual predators. So, the Ghomeshi Effect Theater Production has put up a video which they're calling Mean Tweets in response to public criticism of their honestly illegal and grotesque use of an innocent person's name to promote their shambling, idiotic, and lying narrative, and, of course, to try to suck money from the government, which means from your pocket. So their Mean Tweets video begins with a card, a text screen, that says the team behind the Ghomeshi Effect, which they describe as a verbatim dance theater piece, and I don't even know what that means. It sounds like a bunch of horse crap. That gives voice to survivors of sexual assault in Canada. What? No, it doesn't. I mean, if we're talking about the accusers against Ghomeshi, they are not survivors of sexual assault. They're liars, criminals, fraudsters, and opportunists who colluded and misled the Crown and the police. They're criminals. They are the ones who sexually assaulted Ghomeshi using the proxy of the media and the courts. The only survivor of sexual assault related to the name Ghomeshi is John Ghomeshi himself. And whether you like him or not, that man was brutalized, was raked through the grinder by a collection of fraudsters and their abettors, the media. But of course, this project has apparently received hundreds of so-called mean tweets on Twitter, and here are a few of them. Well, let's see what they say. The first so-called mean tweet they read is from somebody called Apollo Creed 4, and it is the hashtag Ghomeshi Effect about scorned mentally ill women falsely claiming abuse? That seems fairly obvious, doesn't it? The answer would be, of course, yes. But let's be fair, they might not be mentally ill. They could also just be amoral criminal predators rather than mentally ill. Why give them an excuse? But we know that the claims were false. I mean, that was proven. This is not a matter for debate. They were absolutely and completely exposed as fraudsters by the excellent work of Marie Henein, Ghomeshi's very capable and charismatic lawyer. The next one, read to the accompaniment of much mocking laughter, was someone called Pam Mustard, who said on Twitter, "I checked, same agenda as other irrational feminists." And, I checked, and then they make a big point of, oh, there's a place you can check. Well, I mean, you can check what people's agendas are by, reading their about pages and so on. The agenda here is quite clearly to get money and to profit off slandering somebody who's already been ground up in the courts. Same agenda as other irrational feminists. I would argue that they're not irrational. They're just amoral. They're quite rational. They're succeeding in making money by slandering and publicly torturing somebody who has already had their life ruined by fraudulent accusations. I'll bet you a buck, that none of the so-called conversation about surviving sexual assault deals with surviving the sexual assault of a false allegation. The next one is from somebody called Marlon Brando, who says, I object to outright offensive smear disguised as publicly funded art, and then types in all capitals, shameless. And of course they're reading these to mock them. And at this point, watching their video, it crossed my mind that, are these really the meanest of the mean tweets? Surely not. Surely there are trolls calling them, bitches and cunts and whores and, all manner of other very derogatory slander. So why are they reading these particular tweets as the examples of the worst? These, in my mind, all of the ones that we've read so far and the ones to follow, are apparently quite legitimate complaints about using Ghomeshi's name in a money-grabbing feminist art project to associate his name to sexual abuse or sexual victimization, when in fact he is the Ghomeshi is the one victimized. That's not the narrative they're pursuing. They're pursuing the narrative that he's the abuser, even though he's not. He's the victim. So why are they reading what I think are very legitimate complaints against themselves and laughing? And I think it is to try to reclaim the idea that they are blameless, that the most legitimate complaints that have been made against them, which are the ones they're reading, I think, are to be dismissed and laughed at. I don't think it's going to work. I think anybody with more than 4 brain cells is going to read these tweets. I object to outright offensive smear disguised as publicly funded art, and the money-grabbing activity that goes with it, slandering a man found not guilty, the man whose accusers were fraudsters and criminals, I would say sexual predators acting through the proxy of media. The next so-called mean tweet is, we can make a play and smear her son's name after he's proven innocent. Ontario Arts Council will even pay us. Then she makes a sarcastic face of some kind. It really must be nice to be above the law, to be so privileged that you can actually flaunt the law, flaunt the decisions of the courts, continue to slander somebody's name, and claim to be a victim while doing it and get money. I mean, I'm not sure if irony is the right word. We need something like irony, but it's recursive irony or something like that. I also don't want to, belittle public funding of the arts. I think that is important. And to be fair to the Ontario Arts Council, if they are indeed helping fund these bunch of criminals, I very strongly doubt that they are aware, that they realize that what they're funding are sexual predators and criminals. Because that's what they are. This is sexual predators and criminals masquerading as art and activism. The next one is read by the only male feminist in this video, which is quite funny because what he's reading says a great example of feminine toxicity, and I guess he makes a comedic point that they didn't hit spacebar in between the words great example of. That's all jammed into one word, as is the phrase feminine toxicity is made into one word. I think that's an excellent coinage of a new term.
Great example of feminine toxicity. One word.
So, I'll ask a rhetorical question to the beautifully blonde-haired and coiffed and bearded gentleman with the little glasses. Do you fear your female feminist colleagues? Do you fear the power they have over you? Because if you don't, you might not be fully aware of how much danger you're in. Just saying. I don't want you to come to harm, sir. Maybe you should run. This one reads, these women need mental health care. First I laugh at them, and now I pity them. And of course they laugh at this. Now, recall that the video we're responding to here was called Mean Tweets. Well, in spite of that title, none of the tweets that they read, which presumably were the worst examples of mean tweets that they could come up with, none of them were mean. They were all, I think, quite legitimate concerns, legitimately expressed complaints about a group of people who, very cynically, and I would say in the most amoral fashion, are attempting to profit off the ongoing slander and destruction of an innocent person's life, and the destruction and the pain heaped on that person's family, who was found innocent in a court of law, not on a weird technicality, but because his accusers were flagrant and blatant fraudsters, were caught repeatedly lying and attempting to deceive the courts and the prosecution, deceive the Canadian public. And those lying, opportunist, criminal, fraudsters, sexual predators, and by that I mean Ghomeshi's accusers, continue to be lionized by the mainstream media. I was not aware, well, until this Ghomeshi case, that the mainstream thought that sexual predators and criminals were people of heroic stature. But apparently that's how it works now. But the Ghomeshi effect, these are like a secondary level of opportunist, predatory sexual criminals attempting to profit off the continued abuse of the name of a man who was found not guilty, definitively not guilty. And I very strongly suggest that they should not receive one single penny of my money or yours out of my taxes. Because they're sexual predators and criminals, in case that slipped your notice. Now, as you know, this video and all others going forward on this channel are related to the Lighthouse Project, which, among other things, gives assistance to people fraudulently accused of crimes in the Canadian legal system and elsewhere. You can go find out about the Lighthouse Project in the link in the low bar, as well as our Patreon page. Donations there are, of course, voluntary, unlike organizations who seek to steal your money through taxation. As always, thanks very much for watching, and have a lovely, lovely day.